We've heard a lot in the news about a potential rail strike and what it could mean to the country. Andrew Donaldson is a West Virginia native and has worked in the transportation and logistics field in the military and in the private sector for 15 years. He's also a popular radio and podcast host and the managing editor of OrdinaryTimes.com, and he joins us now. Andrew, good morning. How are you, sir?
I'm so excited to be on this 580 Live because Dave's actually on it. They only ever let me on here when you're off for some reason, so I'm thrilled to death. Thanks for the time.
You were on here once before, that's right, but you've never done a show when I was when I was host. I was off for some reason. Got to get the West Virginia stuff out of the way. You are a native of West Virginia, right?
I am. Summersville, thank you very much.
Summersville, all right, one of my favorite towns. Go over and have yourself some fantastic wings and burger over at Maloney's if you get an opportunity in Summersville. That's my thing about Summersville. And by the way, I also want to say thank you for your military service as well.
Oh, my pleasure. I'd do it again if I could. But yeah, Malone, I love it. One door down from the old Bill's Barbershop where I got my hair cut most of the time growing up. So, yeah, know it well, and hopefully get back up there for Christmas here in a couple of weeks.
Awesome. All right. So Andrew, this is kind of confusing because we started hearing last week that a strike had been averted due to congressional action. Then the president signed a bill into law that would make the strike illegal. Where is it now?
It's a mess. This is going to be one of those things that you want to put a bookmark on because this is going to be a story down the road, and everybody's going to be, well, how did that happen? Let's explain how this happened because this is a lesson in kicking the can down the road over and over and over again. These negotiations went on for 3 years because these unions have 5-year windows to negotiate in. And during those 3 years, what happened? COVID. What was the sticking point for these rail workers? Their sick time. So back in September, the administration, of course, stepped in. They brokered a deal. Marty Walsh, Labor Secretary, stepped in. The heads of the unions and the companies and the Labor Secretary banged out an agreement. And they threw themselves a parade. Now, why is that important? Because the transportation calendar runs a little differently. All the stuff for Christmas, that stuff all moves August, September, October, so they didn't want to shut down because that would have really screwed up Christmas. So they did this deal, and because they knew, the administration and everybody else knew, because of the cooling off periods and because of the unions having to ratify these agreements, that would push it past the election in November, which it did, which brings us to what happened last week. All these rail workers, they did not ratify, and I know this is about half of those workers voted not to ratify that agreement. So what happened was they used an old thing from the 1920s that Congress does have a delineated power to step in and force these agreements onto these union workers, and that's exactly what they did. So they don't want a rail disruption of the economy right before Christmas. They forced this through. Congress passed it on Thursday and Friday. The Senate passed it. Joe Biden signed it. That's where we're at. The reason I say that that's not the end of it is, yes, we averted an economic issue. Yes, it ends the strike for now, but when this agreement comes up again in about 2 years or so, you now have some very aggrieved workers, and we also need to watch the workforce, see if there's a big movement in it. This is not over, and you just probably made it worse for down the road, but we kicked it past Christmas, so who cares, right? Yeah. We should care.
Well, and here's what I was reading, Andrew, when I was looking at this morning, and I'm doing a little research for the show, and I'm Googling all these things. I'm seeing these articles on MSNBC and CNBC and all these places, and what they're all saying is, it's over. It's over. And my takeaway from it, knowing absolutely nothing about it, is the same as what yours was. It's like, this is not over. I mean, that's a fair assessment, right?
No, federal regulators, the reason this is so contentious in the first place, this is a sector in the last 6 years that has lost 30% of its workforce because of attrition, because it's long hours, it's hard work, it's a lot of travel. And again, things don't happen in a vacuum. They happen in a sequence. COVID brought this sick time thing to a fore because they have really strict attendance policies. And they'll say, well, they have PTO time and stuff. Well, the thing about PTO time for anybody that's ever had to deal with this sort of thing is the company can reject PTO time. That's at their discretion. Sick time's protected. You can't be punished for being sick, taking off sick for you or a family member, whatever the case may be. That's why they wanted it, because COVID brought all this to a head. That's why they're so hard up on it. So you really want to watch these numbers. Now, they get, because this agreement's going to go back to 2020, they're going to get a lot of back pay and back bonuses and stuff because of this agreement. That'll take about 60 days. So here's your window to bookmark this stuff. 60 days from now till the next negotiation period in roughly about 2 years. How much of this workforce bleeds off? Because you don't have to have a full-blown strike. If they get short on workers, that's going to cause an economic disruption also. And this is a sector of the economy. They were talking, if this thing strikes, you're talking $2 billion a day, talking 40% of all mercantile and raw goods touch rail, and then the exponential things that come out of that, like that would shut down ports, that would shut down trucking, that would affect everything. everybody ought to pay attention to this because we're going to do this again sometime in the near future, and it's going to be even uglier because of the way they dealt with it this time.
And, of course, we're talking with Andrew Donaldson, who is a transportation and logistics expert on this situation here. And you talk about supply chain issues, and we've all, no matter what sector you're in, from automotive to grocery on down, everybody's talked about supply chain issues. You ain't seen nothing yet
No.
if this actually happens. I want to get your take on this before we let you go. And this was, I mentioned I was talking about CNBC earlier. One of the union representatives told CNBC, and this is a direct quote, Andrew, "Remember those who sided against us, and we will remember them in the upcoming election." Now, unions, of course, almost unanimously supported Joe Biden in 2020. If Biden runs again, or whomever the nominee for the Democrats should be, do you think that it could be enough to make a difference? Are they that angry about this?
Well, Joe Biden made a political calculation based on a math problem here. There's 115,000 rail workers. There's 260 million registered voters. So if you shut down the economy or the economy takes a really bad hit, and he's in his election cycle right now, remember, because he's up for re-election, that's the math problem. I don't have great West Virginia education math, but I can figure that one out. 115,000 to 260 million. Look, the rail workers are going to feel aggrieved here, and they got a point because they got forced to do something they voted down. So these old school union guys, look, a lot of these guys still exist in West Virginia. Look, I grew up around the coal mines. Look, if anybody needed a union, it was coal miners, right? If these union heads and the companies and the government all work together on things like this, that really leaves the workers out in the cold. I hope workers take a good long look at this because this crosses a lot of the old streams. This breaks up the old playbook a little bit. It's going to be very interesting to see how it plays out going forward.
Andrew, if people want to check out your work, I mentioned all the things you do from the radio to the podcast to the website. Where can they track you down to learn more about you? Because you're a fascinating guy and doing a little research on you.
Oh, yeah, I really appreciate it. Always glad to be on hometown radio. This is a talk radio station I grew up listening to with my dad going to Charleston when I was lucky enough to get to do that. So love being on the hometown station. Heard tell, all the podcasting platforms, YouTube, those sorts of things. Ordinary-times.com. Really talented writers I get to work with there. Always happy to join you, Dave. Be back anytime you want me.
Well, I got to give you this because I had a text here. If I can call it up here real quick to the Fruits Pharmacy text line. Somebody, I was talking about Summersville, your hometown. Someone texted and said, Bill's Barbershop in Summersville was such a great barbershop. True throwback, not the silly foolishness many barbershops give us these days. So a shout out for Bill's. I don't know whether it's still open or not, but somebody texted about it. So.
No, they retired, but you did not want to go. It was right beside the courthouse. You did not want to go on Election Day. I promise you, you would not get a good haircut if you got a haircut at all because all they do is talk politics all day. Great guys, Bill McClung, Rural Butcher, wonderful, God-fearing men. Love those guys. So thanks for the shout-out to them.
All right, Andrew, I appreciate you being here. We'll talk soon, man. Thanks a lot.
Anytime, sir.
All right, it's 7 minutes away from 10. So, yeah, I mean, when I read this morning about this rail strike, and you know, last week we heard, oh, the rail strike is over or whatever. Actually, it never began, but it's been averted by Congress. No, it's not. It's a communications, a transportation and logistics expert in this sort of thing in the military and the private sector. No, all they did was basically kick the can down the road, which is what politicians do a lot of times. And that's not limited to just the Democratic side of things. It's 9:54.